Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about planning a successful season. A lot of people don't give a huge amount of thought to the overall season. They spend plenty of time thinking about their training, how hard they're going to work, what they're going to do, but not necessarily how the whole season is going to come together and how it's going to be pieced together. And a lot of the time they do fantastic in training, but then when it comes to actually getting results in races, things just don't seem to happen. Most of the time, a lot of it's down to a poor choice of racing or a poor choice of timing for the racing. So I'm going to go through some areas which I think that if you spend a little bit of time thinking about and planning a little bit better around, you can actually increase the likelihood of having a good season without necessarily working any harder or changing your training a huge amount. So stay with me and I'll go through what I think you can do to have a successful season. A big part of a successful season plan is actually thinking about when to do what. You know, there's no point trying to take on large chunks of training and a lot of races during a period where you know work's going to be busy, when kids are on holidays and they're always going to be around and you don't have the time to actually commit to training. You need to think about when you can maybe use types of training methods that don't require a huge amount of time and when you might need to use training methods that do. And then actually position them appropriately throughout your season so the training is actually working for you rather than against you. The end result is just trying to make progress. And if you find yourself going through the motions without having a plan for what you're trying to do or when the best time to do it, you'll end up wasting a hell of a lot of time. Race selection is something I genuinely feel people don't really think about a huge amount. They might just pick a race because it's in a popular venue or a cool venue, or they might pick a race because it's just the next thing on the calendar. They never really think about the course that suits them, the time of year that's going to suit them to race. And with the result, you know, if you have a bad race, it can really hurt the rest of your season. If you haven't thought about the race that you're entering and you just enter it for no good particular reason, and you do end up having a poor result, that result is going to sit in your head. It's going to eat away at confidence. And a lot of the time, this only happens because you never really planned the race fully and you never really considered, did it suit your strengths? You know, was it going to work for you? And sometimes you can actually go into a race quite unprepared or not particularly suited to it, but yet that result is going to stand and it's going to be something you're going to think about for the rest of the season. Planning around your strengths is usually a pretty good idea, especially if you've got a ranking that you're trying to achieve over a race series or a number of races. You know, pick races that actually suit you where you can. Sometimes we just pick races willy-nilly thinking that they're just on the calendar, and we kind of know inside ourselves that certain races aren't in a venue that we particularly like, or perhaps they're in cold conditions and you know you don't like cold conditions. You know, suit your strengths. Don't just do races because everyone else is doing them. Pick the races you know you have a chance of succeeding at. This is what the professionals do. There's a reason why professionals don't do every single race on the calendar, and it's because they don't want to waste their time on a race that they're just simply not suited for. And consistency, when you look back on a season, can actually be achieved when you're just picking races that suit you. And it's not a case of that you're trying to avoid things that aren't, because you always want to work on your weaknesses. But you do just want to be smart and make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance of succeeding and not wasting time on things that were never meant to be.
So something I'm a really big fan of is putting practice races into your season schedule, because if you have a couple of races, they're there for you to go through your process. You'll actually learn from your mistakes. So if you're doing something like an Ironman at the end of the season and that's your big race, you can do maybe a half marathon or a marathon earlier on in the year so that you can get used to your pacing strategy, your nutrition, your pre-race rituals, and all these sorts of things. When you've done them once, you get a bit of experience with them, you can refine them and make them just a little bit more effective. And it also highlights any potential mistakes that you could make on race day. And if you can get these all out of the way in races that don't matter, it just allows you to be a little bit more confident and really take control of your A race and get the result you're looking for.
Not giving enough time between races is also another mistake I see a huge amount of the time. You know, if you don't give yourself enough time to address a problem or a learning from a race, you're just going to take that problem with you. So let's say, for instance, you do a race and you figure out something's missing or something you need to work on, but you've got a race every weekend for the next 3 or 4 weeks. The likelihood is that problem's going to stay with you. And if you just give yourself a couple of weeks between each race, you can actually learn from a race, go away, work on what you've learned, and take steps forward between races rather than just taking the same problem along through the whole season. And a lot of the time when people have an unsuccessful season, it's because they had one problem that they never fixed because they did too much racing and never actually had a chance to fix it between the races. Periodization is absolutely critical when it comes to putting together a successful season. And all you're trying to do is break up the season into a few chunks so that you can kind of keep your focus on specific things and not get lost down the track and down the season. You're focusing on what's important now, right now, and you're not getting excited about what's coming next week. So for me, I like to break it up into 3 phases. The first is what I call base phase. This is where you build your aerobic capacity. It's the long, slow, steady stuff that isn't necessarily going to help you with racing if your race was tomorrow, but it lays the foundation for what's next to come. Your build phase is where you're going to do all your intensity, and you don't need to spend a lot of time working on intensity, and if you do, you generally start to get fatigued and start moving backwards. But you like to put that just after the base phase so that you can top up and just sort of bring the ceiling of what you're capable of doing. And the underlying fitness is going to be there, so your risk of injury is actually lower when you put a bit of intensity in after you've built things through volume. Your final phase is the specificity phase, and this is basically where you start coming into competition and you switch your focus from building fitness to actually preparing for the race demands. You might start looking at training that actually replicates what you're going to be doing on race day. At this point, if you're still trying to build fitness, you've left it kind of late and you are starting to take risk, but it's never too late to build more fitness. But I would just say try to focus on the sort of sessions that are actually going to be similar to the type of racing demands you're going to meet. So if you're going to be racing in hills, do some of your training on hills. If you're going to be doing some hot races, then train in the heat. It's all about getting used to what you might experience on the day so that it's familiar and it's not going to catch you by surprise. One of my favorite expressions is money in the bank, and I think that's exactly what you're doing when you're planning out your season. You're putting all these pieces of preparation into a big box so that they're ready for you on race day. And if you're a particularly nervous athlete, it's really, really nice to think on race day when you start feeling those nerves that you've done your homework on the venue, you've done your homework on the training you needed to do, you've done the training, the venue suits you, and you're familiar with what you're going to be doing. And then you can really just sort of think to yourself, well, look, I've done it before, it's nothing new, and that does really help with nerves. And then when you see the other athletes around who haven't done it, and you can see the nervousness, you start to realize that you're actually in a very good position to really take control of the race. So by doing your planning, and by doing your preparation, and by actually thinking about the season as a whole, you are putting money in the bank that is going to be there for you come race day. So as you can see, season planning isn't particularly hard, but a lot of the pieces, when you think about it, you're probably neglecting. So it is worth just sitting down and having a real think about areas which you can plan ahead for. And if you do, you're actually giving yourself a really good chance to succeed, even if it's just limiting the chances of things going wrong. So if you found this beneficial, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, make sure to drop them in the comments box below. Thanks very much for joining. I'll catch you next time.